only house buyers suffer in an abandoned housing project, the banks and the government also suffer those devastating effects of abandonment. Do you know that the consequence of an abandoned project of house buyers, bridging financier and the government, the grave injustice to naive and innocent house buyer is to end up being a victim of an abandoned project. It is traumatic experience having to endure a situation where you place your entire saving to own a home, only to discover that the house never gets completed, and worse, you still have to service the bank loan. Your life is screwed. In this episode, I would like to dwell on the issue titled Abandonment, One Abandoned Housing Project Far Too Many, and the way forward with our hybrid BTS 1090 concept, build and sell 10:90 concept. Let's face it, there's no solution for abandonment. We just have to prevent it from happening. Could preemptive measures be adopted and enforcement organized to avoid future abandonment? In my earlier episode 7 titled Lack and Lux in Enforcement Program Weakens Our House Buyers Entitlement, we look at some of those existing stringent rules and the safety net that are already within the existing law. Today, I want to talk about the consequences of an abandoned project to house buyers, bridging financier and the government. Now, although the majority of developers have fulfilled their delivery promises to house buyers, there are still some bad apples that have reneged on their end of the bargain when they abandon the projects. There are tens of thousands of hard luck house buyers who are facing these failed dreams, i.e. abandonment of housing projects by the developer. They bought into a housing project that was subsequently abandoned by the developer. Not only house buyers suffer, the banks and the government also get the sparks. The devastating effects are as follows. 1. The house buyers involved still owes the bank the amount that they had been drawn down and paid to the rogue developers. 2. The house buyer's borrower is blacklisted and the possibility of him or her taking another loan is 0. Thirdly, the house buyers continue to service the partially drawn down housing loan and he or she faces the consequences if he or she is unable to do so. He or she will risk being blacklisted by Bank Negara Malaysia and the banking system of checks. Fourthly, he or she continues to stay in their rented house because the dream house that they had bought had turned into a bad nightmare.
It's too expensive, I'm done.
He or she blames the government for allowing such a hazardous, nonsensical system to exist and for being unable to help them. Remember, the sale and purchase agreement is a government statutory form where not a single word may be altered by either vendor or the buyer. Sixthly, the bridging bank suffers in that they are now holding collaterals, meaning parcel of lands within which the houses are built, that have become fragmented and have multiple charge holders, the end financier banks. It becomes virtually impossible to cash out to recover the exposure. 7. The end financier bank suffers in that the house buyers does not get their house and is therefore not likely to be able to service their housing loan. Worse still, the incomplete house has zero cashable value. The government continues to face the wrath of victims of abandoned projects for allowing such a hazardous system to exist and subsequently for being unable to help them. 9th, the government also faces the angry Malaysian rakyat for using so much of taxpayers' money in an attempt to revive some of those abandoned projects, which are actually business failure. It creates a situation of profit privatized, losses nationalized. Now, I want to dwell into the success or failure of any project. Now, under the present system of sell then build, for house buyers to get their homes they bought, the following condition, totally beyond their control, must be met. 1. The developer secure enough sales to satisfy his cash flow requirement. 2. That the developer is a bona fide one. Thirdly, that they are professionals, honest, and attempt through the good administrative sense their best to complete a project. Fourthly, that they do not have other problematic business ventures whereby the money that they collected from house buyers may be diverted to solve their other problems. Fifthly, that they enjoy good fortune and their project is successfully completed. That there is no drastic economic downturn. The sad truth is that the non-fulfillment of some or any one of the above, which I mentioned, will spell trouble for the unfortunate buyers involved. This is what tens and thousands of buyers have found out. A bit too late. Together with the dependents, we are looking at hundreds of thousands and they continue to suffer in silence. The havoc created to victims of failed housing projects is widespread national issue. Look at the number of abandoned projects and the number of buyers affected and left in alert to fend for themselves. This is not only unfair, it is downright unacceptable and disgusting. How do we expect those who are directly facing such a situation to stomach it while those developers go scot-free? And yet we pride ourselves as a caring society with a caring government. Why should buyer play a game of Russian roulette when it comes to buying a house? Now, the revolver has 6 chambers, each supposed to have 1 bullet. In this game, 1 bullet is put in one of the chambers and the chamber is spun. Only 1 chamber out of the 6 will be aligned to the trigger. The gun is then pointed at the gambler's head and the trigger pulled. The probability of the bullet being fired is 1 in 6. Thus, the chance of being shot through the head is 1 to 6. 1 in 6 will suffer the fateful death of the game of a Russian roulette. This game is depicted in one of the movies that I've seen. It's called The Deer Hunter, where American soldiers were fighting in Vietnam while highly drugged were made to play this game with heavy side betting. Although the odds are not as bad when buying houses, the principle is the same. But why should buying a house be a risky affair? Any one abandoned housing project is one far too many. Now, an average working person who buys a house does not have the faintest intention and expectation to be involved in any form of litigation or to be forced to seek remedy from the housing tribunal in a court of law to enforce his legitimate rights. Buying a house is to the average person the most precious investment he can make. It is indeed very cruel and unjustifiable when such a noble intention turns into a living nightmare. And this is the key reason as to why the government had to enact law in its purported attempt to protect house buyers. Yet, look at the number of abandoned projects and the number of involved house buyers who are suffering various degrees of financial hardship. We surmise that no amount of legislation would totally eradicate such problematic propagated by wayward developers. The building industry is just like any other business and is not excluded from business risks. And since the success or failure of any housing project cannot be guaranteed by any party, it's only fair for the people to expect the government to institute a system that totally or to a large extent insulate house buyers from such business risks and uncertainties. This takes us to the Build and Sell Concept 1090, in short BTS 1090 concept, where the house buyers only pay 10% deposit for the property, sign the sale and purchase agreement, and wait for the entire construction to be completed in totality before the balance 90% is paid to the housing developer when the keys with water, electricity is connected and ownership papers with title deed are available. This BTS 1090 concept is another topic I will elaborate again in my next video. Today, due to the prevailing system in the housing industry, house buyers are facing serious risk when they make purchases. Indeed, even car buyers have more protection than house buyers. Has anyone ever heard of a person who bought a car and never got a car? Therefore now, more than ever, we need everyone in Malaysia, whether they be political leaders, legislators, government servants, housing developers, the corporate world, to practice good governance and moral responsibilities. This is of paramount importance in order that the interests of present house buyers, our children, our children's children are adequately safeguarded. We have enough of the nonsense of abandonment of housing projects. Some call the housing ministry toothless, when in fact they are not so. They are equipped with the tool in the form of legislation and rules under the Housing Development Control and Licensing Act, Housing Development Regulation, Housing Development Project Account, Statutory Sale and Purchase Agreement in Schedule GHIJ. But what went wrong? Why are abandoned private housing projects still litter the skyline of the peninsula? What about Sabah Sarawak? This doesn't even take into account those abandoned public projects of federal and state. Could preemptive measure be adopted and enforcement organized to avoid future abandonment? Your guess is as good as mine. Question 1. Dr. Cheng, the Ministry of Housing and Local Government must live up to their name. They are the ones who issue the developer's license to housing developer to sell and build, and they must be held accountable. They say they are doing their best to revive the abandoned project that has eaten into my 8th year. Where got law? Whose fault is it? Are they not the regulators? My wife and I have frequent quarrels and cried over this nightmare. We are emotionally and financially drained. Question 2, Dr. Cheng. The Ministry of Housing says that my apartment is still categorized as sick project and has not been declared as abandoned by the Minister of Housing as yet. It has been classified as sick category for the past 7 years. We continue to rent an apartment because we do not know when we can have the house completed. The ministry said they cannot do anything. Is that true? Now, I have in my earlier video, episode 7, emphasized the various sections of the housing law that the Ministry of Housing and Local Government could supervise, monitor, police, and preempt housing projects from being abandoned. They must cast a safety net wide enough to prevent Project Lewat to evolve to Project Sakit and finally maturing the Project Terbengkalai, to me collectively referred to as problematic projects. The law are there, but short of enforcement, the buyers become victims of abandonment because of the lackadaisical attitude and the enforcement program are not organized. Oh my god, the list of abandoned housing projects has been increased from 187 as of 16 August 2021 to 198 as of 31st August 2021. That's a dramatic increase of 11 new abandoned projects within 15 days. Can the housing minister do anything to try to revive abandoned projects? Yes, they can. Now, let's look at Section 11 of the Housing Development Control and Licensing Act. It reads, inter alia, where on his own volition, a housing developer informs a controller, or where as a result of an investigation made under Section 10 or for any reasons, the controller is of opinion that the licensed housing developer becomes unable to meet his obligation to his purchaser or is about to suspend his building operations or is carrying on his business in a manner detrimental to the interests of his purchaser, the minister may, without prejudice to the generality of the power of the minister, give directions under Section 12 for the purpose of safeguarding the interests of the purchaser of the licensed housing developer. 1. Direct the licensed housing developer in question to take such steps as he may consider necessary to rectify any matters or circumstances. Direct that a person be appointed or himself appointed a person to advise a licensed housing developer in the conduct of his business. C. Direct a company to assume control and carry on the business of housing developer upon such terms and conditions as a minister may determine. Certify that the licensed housing developer has abandoned housing development. Direct that the licensed housing developer present a petition to the High Court for the winding up of his business, or take such action as the minister may consider necessary in the circumstances of the case for carrying into effect the provision of this Act. But alas, this Section 11, power of minister to give direction for the purpose of safeguarding the interests of purchaser, have never been invoked in totality. The only time it was invoked was when the past Minister of Housing issued a notice to the housing developer some 2 decades ago, and it was abruptly stopped there. For no apparent reason, it was halted. From my discovery, I was shocked to know that the Ministry of Housing tiada mekanisme, denoting that they do not have the mechanism process to go beyond Section 11. Can you fancy that? Thank you for your excellent question. My next talk will be on Build Then Sell 1090 concept, a safer way for house buyers. The BTS 1090 is a far safer mode of home delivery system, and the government should without further delay compel the industry player to adopt the system, as we believe it will drastically, if not totally, eliminate cases of housing projects being abandoned. See you in the next episode.